Hello everyone and welcome to session 6 here in our database design and management course. I know you might have felt like it's been a rough couple weeks with the ERD diagrams, and you can see here in session 6 we're continuing on with the entity relationship data model and how we are going to use that model as our logical process to then lead into our physical design of our database, which we will actually start picking up on session 8. But for this week, we're going to pretty much be like a review week from what we did in the previous chapters from last couple weeks, as chapter 5 in the hands-on database book is really all about normalization and how that applies to the ERD. If we scroll down here to see what all's expected of us here in session 6, I'll actually do a little bit of review here and some of the material that I've created and placed in here. Hopefully you will find helpful. But as you can see, your reading assignment this week is to, if you haven't already read chapter 4 from the hands-on database book, read that, or if you need, reread that, because the only way you can learn these concepts is to follow along as it all builds on one another, as well as to practice the skills. You also need to read chapter 5 this week. This is new material, but it's really just a review of some of the material you've already read in talking about normalization. If we scroll on down here to see what assignments we have, you can see we have the chapter 5 practice assignment here, in which you will be using the hands-on Conger database book here. As you open the Word document here, this is the same thing that's in your book. This is just in the Word format so that you can put your information on this document and upload it in Blackboard. You'll see that you do need to look at your information between pages 81 and 101 prior to completing this assignment. You can see that we are given a sample spreadsheet information here, and right away, based on the information you've been reading, hopefully you take a look and you see this titles column here and you're like, oh, we can't have multi-valued columns. That's a big no-no. And then you start to identify, okay, we see some information here that is redundant. We've got other issues here, and then you can start piecing all these past several weeks together as you're going to create an ERD diagram for this, and then normalize that data a couple of times so that you reach first normal form, meet the criteria for that, and then you take a look at your information again. Okay, how do I get to second normal form? Here's the criteria for that, and you look at your data and break those attributes away and start creating entities that meet that criteria. Make sure you have your primary keys, have your relationships. If we keep going down here, you'll see as you go through all of this, you'll identify candidate keys, functional dependencies. Make sure you're referencing your book to make sure you clearly understand that, and you're going to keep creating your ERD diagrams in Visio and then pasting those here using your snipping tool to get a little picture of your Visio diagram and then pasting it here. You can see you're going to end at third normal form. There's no reason to try to get to fourth or fifth normal form. When you take this data and get it to third normal form, you're doing a great job, as that's where most databases in the world are truly ending at. So that's that assignment. If we go back in to Blackboard here, we will see that we also have the Vince's Vinyls assignment again. Now, I graded pretty lightly on the first one because I just wanted you guys to have the practice of saying, okay, all the information was given to me in the Word document. If you recall that from a couple weeks ago, uploaded the answers for you saying, oh, okay, here are the entities, here are the attributes, here's what we need to create our ERD diagram from. So if you recall, we had 3 entities. We had a seller entity, a sale entity, and an inventory entity. This is the ERD diagram you should have submitted. You were given all the information. In my seller entity, here are the attributes I needed to list. In my sale, here are my attributes I need to list. Then you just needed to come up with your relationships, the cardinality between them. We're telling you, hey, here are your candidate keys, or some suggestions. For the inventory, you might use album, not what I would use. For each of these, best practice really to create unique primary keys might be to just keep it simple and say, for the seller entity, I'm going to have a primary key called seller key. For sale, sale key. So that if you need to use those in other entities, there is your relationship, if it makes sense, and you know you have a unique. And you might even create a composite key. That's up to you, but anywhere in an ERD diagram, if you see the word key, that's going to trigger in your mind, okay, this inventory key is a foreign key because it's in this entity, because it was a primary key in another entity, which is just a simple definition of a foreign key. So that was your ERD diagram. Very simple. You were given all the information, and hopefully now that's making sense to you. And then this week we're going to take it even further and then take a look at our information. Like, oh, as an example here, does the condition of the album have anything to do with the seller? No, of course not. So that's probably an entity all on its own. If you recall from the reading of the scenario, there were 3 different attributes, types of conditions that were mentioned. Does this album have anything to do with the seller? No. Album would be its own entity. And then what about that album? You know, the condition maybe, the artist, whatever. And then, oh, wait a minute, artist. An artist could have multiple albums, so maybe artist is its own entity. So there's lots of ways of looking at this. So that's what you're going to do this week, is start saying, oh, okay, this information is functionally dependent on that, and it's not functionally dependent on my primary key. So that means I should probably create another entity. And then when I create this new entity, I need to have a primary key. Okay, how does this entity relate to this other entity? How do I create these relationships? So that's what you need to look for in this one. Normalizing your data. Just use the normalization forms as kind of a checklist. Okay, here's my information. Does it meet the criteria of first normal form? I've got primary keys. I don't have any multi-valued attributes, and I have, that's pretty much met the criteria. Now, how can I take this information and meet the criteria of second normal form? Okay, need to make sure there's no redundant information, there's no repeating rows, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the definition of that next normal form is, it needs to meet that criteria. If you can get your entities broken out, and you should probably have around at least like 7 entities here, and you have that so that it meets that third normal form, you don't need to go any further. Most databases in the world are going to be at third normal form, no higher. So hopefully you will see all that coming together. I wanted to make sure you guys had ample time to talk with each other, and that's what the discussion board was for last week, so you guys could look at each other's ERDs and be like, oh, you know what, okay, I had some problem too. Here's what I was thinking as a attribute. Oh, I like how you used that and created your own entity off of that, and whatever the case may be, just to get you guys talking about, okay, this was an ERD diagram. I see the difference in ours, and then build on that. So that this week you're going to use those normalization rules and go even deeper into making sure your data makes sense in the logical database design. You also have your chapter quiz here over the content from chapter 4 and 5 from your Conger Hands-On database book. There are 20 questions for that, and you will just need to complete that before the end of this session. And then I've created some notes here, some like cheat sheets I want you guys to have as reference materials leading into getting ready for your exam next week, as well as understanding ERD and normality for your assignment this week. Every ERD needs to have these components. You need to have entities. Those entities need to have attributes. You You need to create relationships between your entities where applicable. And you need to find the cardinality of that relationship, whether it's one-to-one, many-to-many, whatever the case may be. Not only that, you need to have those components. Well, how do you get to that ERD? So you need to identify your entities, identify your attributes, figure out what the primary keys of those entities are, define those relationships. What are your cardinality strengths for those relationships? Once you have all that defined, now you can use Visio and draw out your ERDs. When you are what you think is done with an ERD, share that with the customer, share that with a colleague, get another opinion. Now in normalization, what we've covered in the last couple weeks, a basic definition of normalization is just being the process of removing redundant information and removing any type of the three anomalies from your database design, whether it's an insertion anomaly, an update anomaly, or a deletion anomaly. Remember that when it comes to your normal forms, each normal form is a set of rules designed to reduce or eliminate those anomalies. I've listed out the criteria for each normal form. As an example, I just talked about this a couple minutes ago. Your data or your entities are in, or your ERD is in first normal form if you have made sure that each row is unique, so you need that primary key. There are no repeating groups of information, and every attribute that's listed represents only one value. Make sure that you have that in your entity and you have reached first normal form. Remove any functional dependencies and you've reached second normal form. But each form up must have been met with the criteria of the normal form below it before you can say that you are reached that next highest level. BCNF is included here, even though as you'll see from this week when you're reading Chapter 5, it's not mentioned. Typically in the world, you're only going to talk about the 5 normal forms. But it is listed here because it was in the other book, and so it needs to be just want you to be introduced to this form, and sometimes you might hear it referred to as 3.5 normal form. When you are creating your logical design, your ERD, don't let yourself get into the pitfall of thinking about the physical design of like a query or a view. Like, oh, okay, if I wanted this information, I would think that the employee name should be listed here. Well, if the employee name has nothing to do with that entity, it should not be there. That's why we create queries and views in our physical design. When we get to actually putting data into those tables, that's where we'll worry about where information is included for the end user to see the results. So try to avoid that pitfall. I've also included an ERD example here. I just wanted you to see how in this I followed all those rules for creating an ERD. Here's that example. Got 4 entities. I've got attributes listed in those. You can see I've reached first normal form because I've identified primary keys in each of these. And I have also reached second normal form because the attributes tie directly to or describe the primary keys for each of these. As you can see, department name, department number, that is completely dependent on that. There's nothing else here that does not make sense. Like, I don't care about an advisor here in the department because advisor is its own entity. It does not describe the department at all. Does the department number describe the advisor? Yes, because the advisor is part of that department. The advisor phone, that describes this advisor. So that is all information that is directly related. You can see that I have a foreign key listed here. That foreign key department number is a primary key in department. Because I'm using that information there, that is how I get a relationship. And you can see I have the one-to-many defined here. An advisor can be part of a department, and a department can have many advisor, but advisor will only be assigned to a single department. So that's an example of an ERD diagram using normalization, using the rules of an ERD, creating the entities, the attributes, creating the relationships, and the cardinality rules. So that's what you guys should be doing when you're creating your ERDs. And just take into thought all that information about normalization when you're creating that. So use that as like a checklist to make sure your data is getting normalized. That is it for what is expected of you this week, guys. The only thing is to, as I already said, there is a exam next week. That's all you will be doing next week in session 7 is completing your first exam, which covers material from all 6 chapters. You will not be creating an ERD diagram next week, so hopefully you just breathe a great sigh of relief for that. But you will see information about entities and relationships, and you might get some examples of a couple entities and then have to describe a part of that. So make sure that you are well prepared before starting your exams next week. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, R. Martin Jr. at ivytech.edu. If there's anything I can do to help you, I will, and I hope you guys are in this week. Things will just start coming together, and you will see the importance of the need for normalizing your data and following the process and paying attention to all of your criteria that you're given, making sure your data, when you are creating your entities, those attributes are only talking about or defining those entities that they are part of. If not, then they probably need to be their own entity. So good job on all the work you've completed this week. I hope you guys see the method to the madness in having you guys look at each other's ERD diagrams, and hopefully with the example I've shown you here and the examples from the book, you're following along with those, and it will help you in finalizing this Vince's Vinyls ERD this week. Thank you guys once again for all the hard work you've put in these first 6 weeks, and I really do appreciate the effort you're putting out. Thank you guys, and have a great 6th session here.